A loud knock on the door shattered the night. Mrs. Linda, 72, a widow living alone in the suburbs, trembled as she placed her old suitcase on the first floor of the apartment building. Under the dim yellow light, her deeply lined face and red-rimmed eyes from a sleepless night were clearly visible. Once a devoted mother, she now longed for a warm place to sleep from her only son, Nathan. Nathan, coldly, from behind the door. "Come in, Mom, but don't bother me. You can sleep on the sofa." A wave of dizziness washed over her. 20 years of raising him, countless drops of sweat, endless sleepless nights rocking him to sleep, all returned now as a cold voice and a cold sofa. Linda closed her eyes, the pain pooling like a 1,000-year-old teardrop. The door shut with a hollow thud. Only the dragging sound of the suitcase followed her shaky steps. Nathan's apartment was spacious, neat, but soulless. On a gleaming wooden table sat a stack of documents and a brand new laptop, not a single family photo in sight. She paused, looking at the empty wall where the memories of 3 generations should have hung. "Linda, my son, I gave everything for you. How could you forget me so soon?" She lifted the suitcase and slowly made her way up 2 flights of stairs. The creaking wooden steps echoed gently, as if each step retraced a memory. The hallway light flickered dimly, the cracked white walls whispered of time past and present loneliness. In the middle of the living room, she set down her suitcase before the sofa. From the pocket of her old gray shirt, she pulled out a faded, enlarged photograph. Nathan taking his first steps, his tiny hands gripping her finger. The boy beamed with joy, and she gazed at him tenderly. She gently wiped the dust off the frame. Linda, with a tremble in her voice, "You promised to take care of me when I'm old. How did you become so distant?" She placed the photo on the table beside a cold cup of tea. Silence filled the space, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock. Everything was present, everything reminding her of a life given entirely to Nathan. Memories flooded in. Nathan's first day of school, his small hand in hers as they passed through the iron gate, the dinners she cooked after long workdays, their laughter while blowing soap bubbles in the backyard. All of it now lived only in memory, so full of warmth, in contrast to the current chill. The door swung open again. Chloe, Nathan's wife, entered in a crisp office dress, eyes narrowing at the suitcase and the photograph. She curled her lip. Chloe, disdainfully, "Nathan said you should stay at a hotel. It's more convenient. This place isn't private enough." Her words pierced Linda's heart like a dagger. Hotel. Linda let out a bitter smile. She once rented a hotel room for Nathan's birthday when she couldn't afford to fix their tiny home. She had poured all her love into every corner of this space. Now, any place that wasn't her son's home would have to do. Tears silently slid down her thin cheeks. She bent down, lifted the teacup, and took a sip to drive away the cold from within. The tea still held a faint vanilla scent, a small warmth in the face of overwhelming solitude. "Linda, my son? I'll show you. I was never a burden." She picked up the family photo and placed it back in the suitcase. Her figure wavered behind the slamming door. The sound of the suitcase sliding across the tiled floor echoed, like the beginning of a new journey. Not for Nathan, but for herself. Beyond the balcony, the city lights flickered. Distant car horns faded into the night. Linda shut the door, locked it tight, then turned to look at the photograph one last time before returning it to her suitcase. Her gaze hardened, breath heavy, but a spark of resolve lit her face. At the edge of the doorframe, a small sign reading "Evergreen Suites" glowed faintly through the glass. Linda smiled gently. Here she was no longer an invisible guest in her son's life, but the quiet owner of another world, one that valued her worth. The night swallowed everything, leaving only the sound of Mrs. Yam. Linda's determined footsteps, dragging her suitcase down the hallway. Under the dim lights, she looked like a silent warrior, ready to reclaim justice and freedom for herself. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the curtain slits, Mrs. Linda realized she was no longer lying in a warm bed, but curled up on a cold sofa. Her daughter-in-law, Chloe, had left a bowl of bland porridge on the table before rushing off without a word. In a weary voice, Linda asked, "Is the porridge okay, dear?" But Chloe merely glanced back hastily. "Just eat. I've got work." Each spoonful of cold porridge cut into her heart, reminding her of the countless afternoons she lovingly cooked for Nathan when he was a child. Before she could finish the bowl, her phone buzzed with Nathan's urgent voice. Mom, my car's clutch is totally busted. The repair's $2,000. Can you send the money right away? Though her bank account held only a few $100s, she didn't hesitate. She called the bank to make the transfer immediately because to her, Nathan was always the top priority. She told herself, as long as he's safe, I can endure anything. Less than an hour later, the doorbell rang. Mrs. Parker, the neighbor, stood there with a bright smile and a folder in hand. Linda, I heard you needed some money. I have a contact at a law office. They're offering a great home equity loan. You can get the money the same day. Overwhelmed by the mounting car repairs and living expenses, Linda gladly followed Parker to a small law office. A young attorney reviewed the paperwork and told her she only needed to sign to receive $10,000 to be repaid over 10 years. Linda signed the papers, convinced she was doing the right thing. Just days later, Parker returned, this time with more bills for plumbing, window replacement, and roof repairs, totaling several $1,000s. If we don't get it done now, the loan contract will incur heavy penalties, Parker warned, her smile tinged with false concern. Linda hesitated, but thinking of the house where her late husband had lived for 30 years, she agreed to spend more to preserve those memories. Meanwhile, Chloe and Nathan seemed to live in a different world. Whenever Linda asked, "Do you need anything else?" Nathan only muttered, "Don't worry, Mom, I've got it covered." Chloe, on the other hand, comfortably ordered designer clothes and expensive food deliveries all day. One afternoon, while cleaning, Linda discovered a receipt for nearly $5,000, neither for car repairs nor home maintenance, but for the essentials of the young couple. Heartbroken, yet trying to remain generous, she picked up the receipt, her eyes brimming with tears. One night, awakened by a dream of her late husband, Linda decided to go to the bank and review her account and signed contracts. In the dim yellow light, she touched each document: the car repair invoice from Nathan, the loan contract from Parker. She read the fine print over and over until she suddenly realized the $10,000 loan would end up costing her double in just a few years. Her heart sank. She had given her trust, and now that trust had become a burden. Sitting at the table, she recalled Parker's words, "Just a small loan, a lifeline. You'll be fine." But that lifeline had dragged her into a spiral of debt, while Parker smiled and said, "Just trying to help." Linda quietly asked herself, why did someone she considered a friend so patiently whisper such sweet, deceiving words? But the most painful realization came from Nathan, the son she loved above all. Every morning he would text her at 2 a.m., "Mom, is everything okay?" Yet never followed up with a call. Chloe freely asked for money to renovate their new house, calling it something you can't even imagine, Mom. They had forgotten one thing. Linda was not an ATM on legs, but a mother, a grandmother who had sacrificed her youth to raise her son. Late at night, she sat by the window, gazing at the shimmering city. The stack of documents in her suitcase was a silent reminder. Who was steering her life now? Parker, with endless special offers. Nathan, with his hollow promise, "Don't worry, Mom." Chloe, with her demand for luxury and comfort. All of them treated her as a tool, a personal bank. Her heart tensed like never before. She whispered to herself, "I won't let anyone use me again." The streetlight cast its glow on her face, highlighting her weathered wrinkles, but also the fierce glint in her eyes. She was no longer the gentle woman tending to paper flowers on a balcony. She was now a silent warrior, resolved to reclaim her dignity and freedom. She gathered the documents, placed them neatly into her suitcase, and covered them with a thin cloth. Tomorrow, she would return to Evergreen Suites, where she was the secret owner, and begin preparing her plan to reclaim her rights. In the quiet hallway, the dry roll of her suitcase echoed. She knew these steps marked a new beginning, the journey from victim to master of her fate, armed with resilience and the will to restore her worth. The next morning, Mrs. Linda received a thick letter from the bank. Mortgage asset liquidation notice. Her heart seemed to stop as she read the cold, dry words. The loan contract she had signed with Parker's promise of special terms was now 3 installments overdue, and the compounded interest had doubled the debt. The bank issued a notice. If she didn't pay $25,000 within 10 days, the house she had lived in for 30 years would be seized and auctioned off. The words non-negotiable burned into her heart like a dagger. She recalled the day she signed the contract. Parker had called it urgent assistance, and the lawyer emphasized do it quickly to avoid penalties. She had trusted with all her heart, believing that after a few years she could repay it and return to a peaceful life. She never thought it would turn out this badly. The notice slipped from her hand and fell to the cold wooden floor. She sank down, her knees trembling, clutching the letter as if holding on to her last hope. A flood of memories opened up. The afternoons she spent tending to the vegetable garden, hand-feeding each row of lettuce. The winter nights when she opened cans of soup just to warm Nathan up before his extra lessons. All that effort was now swept away by the note marked seized. She called Parker. After a long dial tone, Parker appeared at the old house, her smile as sweet as the first time. "Just pay an additional $5,000 and I'll help you negotiate with the bank," Parker persuaded. Mrs. Linda stood silent. Another $5,000. She'd have to take out another loan or sell her old car, the last thing she had left. But when she looked at Parker, she saw a faint glimmer of deceit. She shook her head softly. "No, I don't have it." That afternoon, she called Nathan. "Son, I just received the notice. I'm afraid I might lose the house." Her voice choked, trying to suppress her sobs. On the other end, Nathan hesitated before hurriedly saying, Mom, stay calm. I'll arrange to send money. But what if I run into trouble at work?" Mrs. Linda fell silent. A feeling of abandonment surged within her. She felt completely alone, as though the whole world had turned its back on her. That night, she stayed awake by the door, gazing at the starry sky through the glass. Inside, her heart was full of fear. If I lose the house, where will I go? How long has it been since I dared to think about that possibility? She remembered when her husband was alive, he had promised, no matter how hard life gets, our home will always stand strong. Now that he was gone, that promise, once as warm as forever, had evaporated. 5 days after the notice, Mrs. Linda was bombarded with phone calls from creditors, the line always busy. In the evening, a lawyer sent a brief message. The foreclosure will take place on the 10th of next month. She sat by the desk, trembling as she flipped through the pages of her journal, handwritten entries filled with memories of Nathan, of the life she had once hoped to rely on in her old age. Her heart shattered. Her confusion and despair reached a peak one afternoon when she passed a coffee shop and saw Nathan and Chloe sitting with their young friends. They chatted excitedly about their weekend plans, and Nathan even boasted that he was giving Chloe an expensive vacation. She stopped by the window, eyes brimming with tears, listening to the stories of luxury that didn't include her, the mother who was now in financial distress. Back in the apartment, she took the family photo from her suitcase and pressed it to her cheek. A tear rolled down her face. The pain and hurt were so intense, she thought she could not go on. But then, in that moment of despair, her phone beeped. A simple message from an old friend. "Are you okay? Call me." It was like a small light reminding her that someone still cared. She jumped up, replying with a smile that was more of a grimace. "I'm fine, just a little tired." After hanging up, she sat back at the table, looking at the foreclosure document one more time, then sighed. In her thoughts, she told herself, "I can't give up. My son may forget me. The neighbors may take advantage of me, but I can't let this home of memories be taken away." That night, she didn't cry. Instead, she turned on her computer and went to the Evergreen Suites management page, the hotel she had quietly invested in. The figures showed steady occupancy rates, and the monthly revenue was enough to cover the rent for a small apartment until she figured out a long-term solution. She wrote down every number, calculating carefully. For the first time in many days, hope glimmered on her weary face. "I'll use Evergreen Suites as a springboard." In the continuing flow of thoughts, she still held love and hope for her family. She wrote Nathan a long letter, telling him about her current situation, hoping he would understand and return to support her, not for money, but for care. The letter lay quietly in her drawer, unread, because she wasn't ready to send it. She wanted to prove her ability first, then ask for help. Thus, the first crisis, the fear of losing the house, the feeling of betrayal, and ultimate loneliness, awakened in Mrs. Linda a fierce determination. She broke down but did not fall. The love and hope for her son remained strong, driving her forward as she prepared for the next steps in her fight for justice and freedom. Late at night, the dim yellow light in the makeshift hotel room had not yet been turned off. Mrs. Linda sat upright on the hard chair, her hands sweeping through the stack of loan documents, then flipping over to another file. This time, it was the correspondence from her late husband's lawyer, Mr. Harper. Among the copies of the will that Parker had made her sign, one sheet stood out. It was handwritten in familiar cursive. Original will. Client, Elaine Carter. She shuddered when she realized that this will did not match the version Parker had presented. The name Elaine Carter in Parker's copy appeared sloppy, the handwriting too uniform, lacking the loops she always recognized in her late husband's handwriting. Mrs. Linda placed both sheets side by side, a tear rolling down her cheek as she felt her husband's promise, all assets will be divided equally between you and the children, had been altered by someone. Parker's version stated, all to Nathan and Chloe. Her hand trembling, she pulled out an email file printed from her private account. It was the original will sent to her by Mr. Harper right after the funeral. The last line was clearly marked with a date and a bright red stamp. No party shall be excluded from asset division unless there is written consent from Elaine Carter. This was the legally binding will. Mrs. Linda was horrified to realize that Parker had not only given her a loan with preferential interest rates, but had also taken advantage of her fatigue to secretly alter the will, making the Evergreen Suites, the hotel she had invested in, solely inherited by her son and daughter-in-law. In an instant, Mrs. Linda understood the entire fraudulent scheme. Parker was the intermediary behind the loan contract. Exploiting her desperation to trap her in debt, Chloe and Nathan were using their marriage to seize control of the entire family fortune. Every document, every bank stamp, suddenly became evidence, reminding her that she was not a helpless victim, but was being played in an open game of deceit. From that moment on, Mrs. Linda was no longer the woman quietly shedding tears on the sofa. She immediately called Mary, her only close friend still in contact after all these years. Mary had once been Mr. LaPerso, Harper's legal assistant, and knew every detail about the old will. The moment the phone rang, Mary appeared at the door of Evergreen Suites early the next morning, her face stern and carrying a leather bag with a stack of legal documents. "Elaine, I've read your letter," Mary said softly as she entered Mrs. Linda's room. The room was flooded with morning light, but it did not erase the deep worry etched on Mrs. Linda's face. Mary placed the original will on the table, comparing each line with the version Parker had given. "This is completely forged. Parker took advantage of your confusion and pressured you into signing the altered will." Mary continued flipping through the files. "As for the mortgage loan, she even used her company's name as a guarantor without informing you properly. The actual interest rate is 3 times what was promised. We can sue her for financial fraud and forgery." Mary's voice quivered with anger. "Chloe and Nathan are also involved. They've kept all your payment receipts, the messages asking for money transfers. This is proof of their collaboration to steal your assets." Mrs. Linda sat still, her heart breaking, but at the same time, a flame of determination ignited within her. She thought about the 20 years she had spent raising Nathan, how she had devoted her youth to providing him with every meal, every piece of clothing. And now, her son and daughter-in-law were betraying her for a few contract papers. She clenched her fists. "I won't let them steal my entire life." In that moment, Mrs. Linda officially woke up. All the pain and despair faded into the background, making way for resolve. She stood up, her eyes sharp as a razor, ready to confront the army that had exploited her. Mary placed an action plan on the table. Call the bank to postpone the foreclosure, sue Parker and Nathan, and schedule a family meeting to read the original will. Mrs. Linda nodded gently. In the room filled with sunlight, she was no longer the lonely old woman on the sofa, but a woman over 60, an American who was strong, who had the right to speak up and protect the legacy she had built. Mary handed her the mobile phone. "I'll call the court lawyer. They'll provide emergency assistance. Just follow the instructions, and I'll take care of the rest." Before Mary left, Mrs. Linda grasped her friend's hand, her eyes welling with tears. "Thank you, Mary. I thought I was alone, but it turns out there's still light at the end of the tunnel." Mary smiled. as they parted, leaving Mrs. Linda with the copies of the original will, irrefutable legal proof. She stood by the window, watching the busy traffic. Evergreen Suites shone brightly in the morning sun, not just as a hotel she owned, but as a symbol of strength and freedom. Mrs. Linda quietly thought to herself, "They've awakened a strength in me that I thought I had lost. Now is the time for me to rise again." And so, the twist had been completed. The truth was revealed. Mrs. Linda woke up and received help from her loyal friend. The road ahead was still rocky, but she was no longer walking alone. A new chapter, full of hope and strength, had officially begun. The next morning, when the first rays of sunlight peeked through the curtains of the Evergreen Suites hotel room, Mrs. Linda had been awake for a long time. She was no longer the timid, fearful woman she once was. Her heart was now filled with determination. Sitting at a small desk, she slowly opened her leather briefcase, carefully pulling out the original will, the fraudulent loan documents, and the entire mortgage agreement that Parker had used to ruthlessly push her into debt. First, she initiated the first step of her plan, drafting a new will. The night before, she had spoken with lawyer Mary to prepare a new will, effective immediately, stating that all the real estate, including Evergreen Suites, would return to Elaine Carter's sole ownership, and only after that would it be divided among the heirs according to her wishes. She printed 10 copies, stamped them, and at the same time sent an automatic suspension order to the bank managing Evergreen Suites, requesting the freezing of any transactions from Parker and the disabling of Chloe and Nathan's signing authority. Next, she gathered all the transaction receipts, car repair bills, luxury shopping receipts, money transfer requests, to create a comprehensive report to send to the Financial Investigation Agency. Every small detail was noted, from Nathan's late-night phone call to the forged documents from Parker with incorrect stamps, all evidence of organized fraud. While Mrs. Linda quietly drafted and sent numerous legal documents elsewhere, at Nathan and Chloe's apartment, they remained confidently unaware, believing everything was under control. This morning, Parker had visited with a reminder about an additional $3,000 loan, but Mrs. Linda was nowhere to be found. They knocked on the door, but the phone line was constantly busy. Chloe complained, "Has Mom replied to the messages? Or is she just tired?" Nathan shrugged. "She's probably busy with her paperwork." They didn't suspect for a moment that Mrs. Linda had already frozen all contact. Beyond Evergreen Suites, Mrs. Linda also contacted her bank's CFO to immediately suspend any unreasonable withdrawals from her personal account. When the paperwork reached them, the bank immediately froze the account and blocked all transaction requests from Parker, Chloe, and even Nathan. It wasn't until they called the customer service line that they discovered all transaction requests had been automatically declined. Chloe panicked and asked Nathan, "Why isn't my card working? I just transferred $2,000 yesterday." But Nathan remained silent, simply typing the message, "Mom, I need $500. Then the message returned, "Transaction unsuccessful." As for Parker, Mrs. Linda had also prepared a lawsuit to send to the local court. Mary had confirmed, with evidence of forged notarized documents and illegal credit brokering, Parker could face heavy fines, almost certainly losing her professional license and being required to compensate for all damages. On the desk was a printed lawsuit in black ink with Mrs. Linda's signature and Mary's lawyer's red seal, just waiting for her to sign and submit to the court. Meanwhile, Mrs. Linda also took time to contact the Evergreen Suites management staff, particularly Mr. Reynolds, who had always treated her kindly. She asked him to check the internal security system, provide customer card data, and print out a statement of all activities from the past month. The purpose was to uncover details of how Parker, under the guise of sponsored maintenance staff, had accessed her office, deleted statement files, and installed surveillance software to steal information. The hidden camera footage and server access logs recorded her actions. This chain of moves remained concealed, with Christine, Chloe's assistant, completely unaware. She was still busy preparing rooms for the weekend guests, wondering if Mrs. Linda could help the group go on a trip. All contracts and emails were sent through the old system, but nothing changed, as Mrs. Linda's account had been switched to read-only mode, not allowing edits or approvals. While Parker, Chloe, and Nathan were immersed in the feeling of having won, Mrs. Linda had prepared all legal procedures. That afternoon, she enjoyed a warm cup of tea by the window, overlooking the Evergreen Suites rose garden, her heart calm as ever. She recalled Parker's visit the day before, fumbling with a headache over a new contract. Now, Parker had no opportunity to escape. Before the workday ended, Mrs. Linda sent an invitation letter to Parker and Nathan requesting their presence at Evergreen Suites at 10 a.m. the next morning to discuss the ownership and management of the Elaine Carter estate. The letter was sent by express mail with a red stamp, signaling that this was not just an ordinary meeting. Parker received the letter. Her legal assistant confirmed it as a sign of impending litigation, but she still thought the old woman must be jealous and petty, just a trick. Chloe told Nathan, "Mom's overreacting again, but let's just go to her meeting." At night, Evergreen Suites remained quiet. Mrs. Linda sat at her desk, the yellow light casting a glow on her firm expression. She reflected on every step of preparation: the new will, the lawsuit, the frozen accounts, the camera footage, and the counterattack invitation. Everything was ready. For the first time in months, her heart felt only one thing: peace. Tomorrow, when Parker, Nathan, and Chloe sit across from her, they will realize Mrs. Linda is no longer an endless resource for them to exploit. She is a woman over 60, with legal power and inner strength, capable of resistance. And when this counterattack hits, they won't know how to react. The audience will be on the edge of their seats, eagerly awaiting the moment the court delivers its judgment and the outcome for those who dared to underestimate a lonely old woman. The meeting took place in the large conference room of Evergreen Suites, with windows overlooking the rooftop garden full of roses. Parker, Nathan, and Chloe walked in with an air of arrogant confidence, thinking everything was still under control. Parker even smirked and muttered, "This is probably just another pointless meeting from the old woman." As all four sat down at the table, Mrs. Linda, dressed in a neat suit and with a determined gaze, asked Mary, her lawyer, to present the evidence. Mary proceeded to present the original will with Harper's red seal, compared awkwardly with Parker's forged copy, the money transfer receipts from Mrs. Linda to Chloe and Nathan, the predatory mortgage agreement brokered by Parker, and a copy of a surveillance video showing Parker secretly altering files in the office. Parker gasped as Mary calmly read aloud, "Elaine Carter was deceived regarding her will, credit contracts, and personal property. The court will seize ownership of Evergreen Suites from tomorrow in favor of Mrs. Carter, and Parker will be charged with forgery and fraudulent asset acquisition." Nathan and Chloe suddenly turned pale. Chloe hesitated, stammering, "Mom, it must be a misunderstanding." But the words caught in her throat. Nathan lowered his head, his eyes awkward as he heard the announcement. "The court has also ordered the freezing of your bank accounts until the case is resolved." The conference room door cracked open and enforcement officers appeared, handing over subpoenas and sealing the accounts of Parker, Nathan, and Chloe. Parker tried to protest, but only managed a forced, meaningless apology. She was escorted out, with police watching closely, as the looks exchanged between family members were filled with anger. Chloe threw herself into Nathan's arms, her eyes red with fear. Nathan turned to look at his mother, hesitating but too afraid to speak. Mrs. Linda stood up quietly, nodding to the officer. "Thank you." Her gaze was not one of hatred, but full of self-respect, as if to affirm that she did not want to use her legal power for personal revenge. As the meeting ended, Parker walked out, leaving behind the cold stack of evidence. The neighborhood buzzed with news that Mrs. Parker, once considered a good friend of Mrs. Linda, had been exposed. Neighbors pointed fingers and discussed what punishment she would face. Nathan and Chloe silently escorted Parker to the car, Nicholas's face marked by a late realization of guilt. A few days later, the court officially imposed heavy fines on Parker and ordered her to compensate Mrs. Linda for all damages. The original will of Mrs. Carter was recognized as legal, and Evergreen Suites was returned to her. The bank lifted the freeze on the accounts. Nathan and Chloe lost all inheritance rights. Mrs. Linda did not go to the courthouse to meet them. She called Mary to arrange the paperwork for the restoration of ownership, then calmly returned to her hotel room. She stopped by the front desk, where Mr. Reynolds greeted her with a smile. He extended his hand. "Welcome back to Evergreen Suites, Elaine Carter." She smiled, feeling warmth spread through her. In the following weeks, Evergreen Suites became lively again. Mrs. Linda appeared in simple office attire, personally overseeing the rose garden, chatting with the staff, and listening to feedback from guests. She never brought up the lawsuit with Chloe or Nathan. Whenever a guest asked, she gently replied, "Sometimes the greatest value is freedom and resilience." One weekend evening, she sat in a chair by the window, gazing out at the sparkling city below. She remembered the days of abandonment, the pain of being exploited, but now all that remained were memories. She placed an old photo frame, a young Nathan gripping her hand tightly, an image that now belonged to the past. In the silence, Mrs. Linda whispered to herself, "I lost many things, but I found myself again." She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and enjoyed the peace within her soul. In the end, Evergreen Suites was not just a hotel. It became a symbol of her journey, from betrayal, pain, to awakening and reclaiming her power. She had chosen not to seek revenge with painful blows, but with the law, resilience, and forgiveness. The final lights slowly dimmed, leaving only a fragrant candle on the table, its soft vanilla scent filling the air. Mrs. Linda smiled gently, knowing that despite the many challenges life would throw at her, she could face anything with belief in her own worth and the human message of forgiveness, freedom, and hope that always endures.